British Prime Minister Theresa May's call for an early election appears to have backfired. May's Conservative Party still has more seats than any other party, but they lost their majority. And unless they can form a coalition, they may lose power, just days before negotiations to exit the European Union.
What I think is important in the Brexit negotiations, which will start in 10 days' time, is that we have the certainty of a government that can take forward a plan into those Brexit negotiations. That's why I think at this critical time for our country, it's important to form a government in the national interest. As we're the party that won most seats and most votes, we're the only party that is in a position to form a government that can do that, and that's what we're doing.
CBS News foreign correspondent Mark Phillips was up early in London as the results came in and joins us now. Okay, Mark, first break this down for us. If the Conservatives have the most votes and they're going to be able to form a government, why aren't they celebrating today?
Well, they're going to be able to form a government, but it is a minority government. They don't have a majority within the House of Commons. There are 650 seats in the House of Commons, and they do not have half of those seats. So they're now having to rely, you mentioned a coalition. It's not actually a coalition. They're going into a minority government situation in which they are entering into talks with this fringe sectarian party from Northern Ireland, the DUP party, who will likely, in instances, support them when they need their votes to carry any legislation through the House of Commons. So we just heard the Prime Minister talk about a government of certainty. This is not a government of certainty. This is a very uncertain situation for her party, and for the country, particularly, as she says, right on the cusp now of going into these what are likely to be extremely tough and possibly even nasty negotiations on the divorce terms for leaving Europe.
Polls predicted a much better night for May, and they were wrong. The Conservatives lost as James Corman had a much better night. Do we have a sense of why that happened?
Well, her lead evaporated over the course of the election. She had called this election a snap election. She didn't have to go to the people now. She could have waited until the end of the 5-year term. But she was riding high in the polls. She was an average of about 17% ahead, the opinion poll said 2 months ago when she called this vote. And she thought she could essentially cruise to victory. She built the campaign around herself. It was the May team. It wasn't even the Conservatives. She repeated the mantra over and over again, strong and stable leadership wherever she went. But then over the course of the campaign, there were a series of policy flip-flops. She had decided not to participate in TV debates against her opponents. That made her look a little detached, a little arrogant. Little by little, Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour campaign decided not to fight the campaign on her terms, on terms of a Brexit mandate, a mandate to negotiate the terms of Brexit, but rather on economic and social terms within Britain, on funding hospitals, on funding the health service, on funding education, on providing free tuition for college students, and that kind of thing. And he struck a chord that seemed to resonate with people. Little by little, her lead came down. There were also some major policy flip-flops in the manifesto that the Tories had put out with respect to the kinds of pensions that are paid to the elderly, or the kinds of money that's taken from them for social services in retirement homes and that kind of thing. And little by little, her lead chipped away, so that going into the vote, the opinion polls were showing slim, single-digit leads, and over the course of the night, that kind of evaporated. The Conservative, other things happened too. The Conservative vote actually had gone up from the previous election, but the Labour vote went up more. And some of the smaller parties, particularly the UK Independence Party, which was one of the main forces driving the country toward leaving the EU, its vote completely collapsed. So that vote split, and it split more for Labour than it did for the Tories, and the rest, as they say, is history.
And Mark, some are saying that Theresa May should resign here. What are the chances of that, really? And if she does resign, what happens next?
Well, she says she's not going to resign. She says she's going to form another government. What happens next is what happens in the Commons, whether or not the government can survive. There are already murmurings, just as there were before, from certain elements within her own party. This vote was very much on her. This whole election was on her. And there are people within the party who would like see a change, but there's no obvious alternative at this point. There's the great pressure coming up of these EU negotiations to be had. She may be able to hang on for a bit, but historically, leaders in her position at the head of minority governments do not survive.
Mark Phillips in London. Thanks, Mark.
Pleasure.